Hopefully by now we've learned how to create basic animations. This exercise here will show you how to create a nice sequence of animations to fine-tune your designs to get a very realistic motion behavior. What we already have on the screen here is a machine with some objects already defined. We already have the rigid groups defined, the joints, and the motors. So if we hit our rigid group color, we see we have 6 or so, maybe 7 rigid groups from the slider, the plunger, the transport, and we've even added rigid groups for these gripper mechanisms so it can actually pitch apart and pick it up. Quick rundown of the joints. As you would imagine, we have a fixed joint on the orange part, some slider joints, some plunger joints, and a revolute joint to get the wrist to rotate around. All right, so now that we have got that basic joints understood, let's hide our joints and take a look at what our motors are. So I'm going to hit the play button first, and you see that it goes back and forth, very similar to what you created earlier. If we change our color option once again to motor color, you see we have 5 motors on here. A slider motor for the transport mechanism to make the plunger go back and forth, up and down, rotate this gripper head, and a couple motors there to slide the sliders in and out to pinch things. So if we play this again, you can see how we have everything sort of happening all at one time. Probably not what you want because the actual gripper is running into the machine itself. All right, so what we're going to use is a timeline to control the exact sequence of operations. So up on your toolbar, there's a timeline command. So if you activate that, it shows all of these motors in sort of a Gantt chart type interface where you can take the cursor here, the slider on the timeline, move it back and forth, and see exactly how those motors react at each step along the timeline. Now, if you don't get this, make sure you solve the model first by hitting the play button, and then it actually builds the solved model in memory. Then you could use the slider here. So now you see the real value of having everything show up in a color. Without color, you kind of don't know which motor really goes to what. You can pick through them and dance through them and kind of get an idea that way. But when you turn the motor color option on, there's really no choice or no chance of getting the wrong motor when you want to make an edit. So this whole exercise here is just to make this thing look a little bit more realistic. Maybe slide over, then forward, then plunge, then pinch something, and so on and so forth. The exact sequence on how it works isn't really critical. The whole exercise here is just to play around with the timeline. So controls that you have over here, if you want to zoom in, you can zoom in and get a real zoomed in view of your timeline here. You can also zoom out if you need to, and zoom way past the outs. If you want to slide things around, you have lots of room over in the further down the timeline to mess with settings and things. And of course you can fit everything to get it fit to your screen. If you right click on a time bar here, you can edit it, which edits the actual position motor. You can delete that entire motor, you can cut it, copy it, paste it, and you can actually mirror it as well. There's also an operation for splitting that if your cursor is not at 0 or at the end, you can split an operation into 2. If you want to add a dual, for example, and I'll show you what that looks like. So you can control 3 things here. You can control where the bar is by dragging the whole bar around. You can control the endpoints by dragging the endpoints in or out. And you can control, sort of where it is on the time bar by just moving things around. So 3 things that you can control. That's based on if your position motor, and if you right click that and say edit, you can edit it. That's based on if you're calculating the speed, it's going to recalculate the duration for you. So depending on what this method here is, you might get slightly different results. So just keep that in mind as you're playing around with things. Everything here is set to calculate the speed for you. All right, so the nice thing here, let me hit play and then stop to get the motors to display again. We do not show the motors in color as you're dragging things around. It's just not the way the system works at this point in time. So the goal is to maybe do something like this. Have the transport slide from left to right, that's the salmon colored motor. Then from back to front, that's the dark blue motor. Then maybe rotate, plunge, and then pinch. So all you need to do is adjust these time bars to get that sequence of operations to happen. So first we want the salmon colored motor, so we're going to leave it there. Then the blue motor, so we're going to drag it over. Then the plunge motor, we'll get it to move over here. Then we want it to rotate, so we'll drag this at the 3-second mark. And then last but not least, we want these two little pinchers to do their magic. Now if we hit play, you see how it does one thing, then does the other, then rotates, and then actually pinches. So if you really want to have things happening sort of overlapping, maybe save some time in the machine operation, you can move these two operations at the same time, draw a rectangle around everything else, and drag them sort of into position, and hit the play button again. Now multiple things happen at the same time, and it rotates around. Now if you want a little bit of a dwell between the rotate and the pinch operation, just take these two and move them out, to whatever you want, 1 second mark type thing, and it will give you a little dwell there before it does what it needs to do. Maybe the dwell should have happened, oops, bumped my mouse accidentally. Maybe the dwell should have happened at a little 2 dwells here, so you can actually add that by dragging some time in there. All right, so if you notice that every time I hit the move my time bars down here, I have to resolve the model. There is an option to speed things up a little bit. What you can do is go to Preferences, Animation Designer, and turn off that Delayed Animation Update. What that's going to do is solve everything as you drag your cursor. So for example, if right in here you want the rotate to start to happen, then you move your cursor where you want it to happen, drag the time bar, and it resolves the model and puts your time bar, well, should have put it back at that point in time. And it plunges and does what it needs to do. All right, I'm getting some funky visualization problems on my screen. That's because I'm running a video capturing tool, and the two don't like each other. Other things that you can do is you can highlight everything by dragging a box around it, right-clicking and hit mirroring, and it's going to mirror it about the very last operation. That way things don't conflict with each other and so on and so forth. Now you have the actual return strokes. It goes down, plunges, pinches, unpinches. Oops, we don't want that to happen. We want it to pinch at the very end. So what you'll have to do is simply drag your pinch events to the very end of your timeline. And notice how it's taking a little bit longer to solve because it's actually solving the whole timeline as I drag my cursor around. You may or may not want that. It depends on you. So now what's going to happen is going to move over, then down, rotate, plunge, rotate. Probably need to reverse these steps here. Want it to retract, then plunge, then everything else. All right, that's the gist of what we would like the users to try to accomplish in this exercise here. Again, whether it goes to the left and right, back and front, none of that really matters. It's just getting them used to playing around with the timeline, getting them used to doing things like splitting and whatnot. So let me turn this option off, and I'll show you what the split operation does. So perhaps you want to dwell right at this point in time. So what you do is you right click on that, hit split, and it gives you two independent events that you can drag around and move it at different points in time. So maybe you want to put a dwell at that location, then it's going to give you that. Again, the beauty here is the color on being able to identify which motor does what, and the Gantt chart type operation here on dragging things around very easily. You can also take your time line, and let's see if I can get it to move around. I'm going to move it to my second monitor, which you can't see just yet, but I'm going to make it a little bit smaller and maybe drag it right back up in a corner here. So if you really want to maximize your space, maybe you have tons of motors that you want to show all in more of a vertical fashion, you can move the timeline off in a separate window and edit in that form or fashion. Also notice on the top of the timeline there are play button, pause button, repeat button, and so on and so forth. So you can play around with those depending on where you're, what you're more comfortable with. All right, another option that you have up here is a step. So watch the timeline cursor. My step, I think, is set to a half a second. So every time I hit step, it increments 1/2 of a, or 1/10 of a second for me. I think that's what the option is set to. So if you really want to kind of step your way through a model and just see what's going on, you can change, you can use that step function. Now, if it's going too fast or too slow, back on the preferences, on the animation designer, you can control what that increment is. Maybe you want to go a half a second. Take big chunks of time to get it to do what it needs to do. Then when you hit the step, it's going to go at a half a second each time and solve along the way. All right, now's the time to explore these neat concepts in Animation Designer.